Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everybody, welcome. It's Susan Coffin here for Attitude Magazine and Attitude's ADHD Experts webinar series. Welcome to all of you joining us today, and welcome back Laurie Dupar, our guest expert. Laurie will be advising you listeners on strategies for cracking what we call the ADHD medication maze. That is specifically how to get and how to afford and how to refill your prescriptions with the least possible hassle. We've heard from so many of you at Attitude about the hassles inherent in taking ADHD medications. Studies show that as many as 80% of people with ADHD can benefit from a stimulant or a non-stimulant medication, and yet many patients never get to experience the vaunted effectiveness of medications. In a presentation for Attitude about a year or so ago, Laurie spoke about the problem of the wrong medication taken at the wrong time of day or in the wrong dose. In today's presentation, Laurie's turning to a different set of impediments. As I mentioned, trouble finding prescribers knowledgeable about ADHD medications, insurance dead ends, problems with 30-day refills, and uncooperative pharmacists, and how to manage medications. So some of the tips that she'll be giving us today are how to choose a prescriber who knows ADHD and medications, why ADHD medications are classified as Schedule II substances and what that means for all of us, some insights into how insurance companies deal with covering ADHD medications and how to cope with, sometimes we've heard uncooperative pharmacists, some money-saving tips, patient payment assistance programs from ADHD medication companies, and finally some strategies for remembering to take your medication as prescribed or to get your child to take theirs. So let me introduce again Laurie to you. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner as well as a credentialed ADHD coach. She is the founder of the International ADHD Coach Training Center, IACTcenter.com, and she specializes in working with clients who've been diagnosed with ADHD. She's the author of a number of best-selling Amazon books, the ADHD Awareness Book Project, and the popular book Brain Surfing and 31 Other Awesome Qualities of ADHD. And I think it's worth noting that in addition to her private clients and her patients and her training, Laurie's a huge advocate for people with ADHD. She's on the boards of a number of important ADHD organizations. She's a speaker and writer for Attitude, for which we're very grateful. And she's a sought-after speaker around the world on coaching and ADHD. So for more information, please check out her websites, coachingforadhd.com and IACTcenter.com. And I want to mention something special. She offers an annual course, a 5-week teleclass, taking the mystery out of ADHD medication. So she'll have the opportunity in that teleclass to offer a lot more than she will in today's presentation. So with that introduction, let me just say that we'd like to find out more about your interests. What's the hardest part of medication management for you? So let's see the results of the poll. Yeah, interesting. Finding a prescriber is a tough one, right? 47% of you have a hard time finding the right prescriber. Insurance companies, oh, we love them. 28% dealing with the insurance company. And then refills and remembering to take the medication, about 12 to 13% each. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for letting us know. And let me turn it over to Laurie at this point.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm very excited. I love the poll, kind of like getting a pulse of everybody right in the moment. And it's exciting because that's exactly what we're talking about today. So welcome, everyone. Susan introduced me, so I'm not going to take any time with that. I'll hop right in here. And I want to start by just talking about an interesting trick that I learned to get through a maze. And I didn't know this, but I started to look at how to get through maze. That's why I was creating this talk today. And some of you may know it, but if you don't, I guess the key is to put your hand on the right wall and follow it. Now, it may take a bit longer to get through the maze, and you have to put your hand on the wall when you first enter it. But rather than getting stuck in the dead ends, what this helps you do is loop back around into the maze to find the next passageway and eventually the exit. And to me, that's a little bit like getting through the ADHD medication maze is a bit like that. I mean, unguided, we can wander aimlessly and frantically into dead end after dead end. And if we're lucky, we find our way out. mean, for years I've been teaching about ADHD medication. At the end of this call, I'll tell you more about the course that Susan was talking about, and also a bonus that I'm offering for you to download. So as a nurse practitioner, 15 years, and ADHD life coach, I have been listening to all of you struggle with finding prescribers who understand ADHD medication, your challenges to getting medication that include, the cost of that, insurance companies that will cover the medication, the extra financial strain of getting ADHD medications, the pharmacists, the pharmacies, where you oftentimes leave feeling shamed. And then there's the biggest problem I encounter in my coaching practice, which is people taking and remembering to take their ADHD medication. The thing is, there's more to getting diagnosed. You're going to have tests, appointments, phone calls, and at every step of the way, it's inevitable it's going to cost time and probably money. So I know I'm really preaching to the choir here when I ask, who would go through this unless they really needed the medication? So month after month, you go through the maze to get the medication to treat your ADHD. And when you first start this, some of you might remember it's a little bit innocent. You trust, knowing that the medication is there, others have gone before, right? And at the onset, you are blissfully unaware that the maze you're about to enter, the obstacles you will meet, and the twists and turns you will encounter, you are entering the ADHD medication maze. If I could, I would cue the Twilight Zone music here. You're going to make appointments, keep appointments, plan ahead, be organized, pay money, not be late. Remember, maybe take tests, probably take tests, explain yourself quickly, pay money, prioritize, keep track of paperwork, not get distracted, solve, calculate calendar algorithms, be patient, not get frustrated, wait in line, make numerous phone calls, endure small conversation, probably encounter people who don't believe in ADHD, play phone tag with office staff, take time off for appointments, pay money, make trips to pharmacy, pay money, dock time off for pay, over and over and over again. You encounter doctors, therapists, office staff, nurses, teachers, pharmacists, insurance companies, pharmacies, and changing laws. This may be you, an adult with ADHD, or maybe it's you, someone who's the parent, spouse, or guardian of someone you love with ADHD. And you're trying to do the best to get the medication to help better manage the ADHD challenges. So this next hour, as Susan was saying, I'm really hoping to be that right hand to you all as we step into the medication maze and find our way past the empty passages that lead nowhere, the dead ends that are so frustrating, with the aim of successfully passing through the maze with our ADHD medication and sanity intact. Okay? Susan already talked with you about the medication, what we're going to be talking about in this webinar, how to choose a prescriber, why many ADHD medications are classified as Schedule II substances, and what that means to you. I'm going to be talking about some insider secrets to insurance companies, things that you might know, things that you might not know, how to navigate that, how to work with whether it's uncooperative or what might seem like unfriendly pharmacists, a little bit about the perspective of pharmacies. Also talk about ways to save some money. There's some organizations out there or some ways that you might be able to save money you might not know about that I'm going to be talking with you about. And then how to remember to take your ADHD medication, which can be a real challenge for a lot of people. The first thing I want to talk about is not all prescribers are created equal. And it doesn't really surprise me that 47% of you indicated that you have a hard time finding the prescriber or a good prescriber to prescribe your ADHD medication. And it's exactly for this reason. They are not all created equal. And even though a person might have prescriptive privileges, it doesn't mean they know about ADHD or about how to manage ADHD medications. And I've listed here the different people that can prescribe ADHD medication. The reason I've done this is because oftentimes the people that seem the most obvious, our psychiatrists, our neurologists, or even our pediatricians are not necessarily the people that are going to do the best job to prescribe for us. And I wanted you to have a list of alternatives or other people that you know can prescribe ADHD medications. And as much as I would like to be able to point you one particular doctor that's the answer, what I have discovered and what I really share with you is what's going on in real time is that you are going to need to talk to different people to find a prescriber that works for you. And people that do understand ADHD or prescribers that do understand ADHD or do understand ADHD medications, it's truly only because they have taken a special interest in that. Whether or not it makes sense, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's fair, many medical providers just don't have the information about ADHD that on their own or what they get in training. All right. In an effort to help you try and discern or find a prescriber that is a good fit for you, that you have confidence in, that you can have a communication with, I devised a list of 13 questions that you can use to talk with different prescribers to find the best fit. Now, these are questions that I've used over and over again. In fact, I think Attitude has a copy of these somewhere. And these questions are really designed from sort of basic information to more advanced information. And as a nurse practitioner, these are questions that I would expect myself to know and be able to answer and want to answer for clients that came in asking about ADHD medications. And these are also what I would call red flags. If the person that might be prescribing for you either doesn't know the answer or doesn't think you need to know the answer, that's a problem. Go look for somebody else. So the questions, I'll just go through them really quickly because there's a copy for you, but it can be as simple as what type of medication is this? Any prescriber should be able to tell you and want to tell you whether it's a stimulant or a non-stimulant. It's not that complicated. And if they tell you you don't need to know it, that's a problem, right? That's somebody you're not going to be able to communicate with. You want them to be able to describe to you how the medication works in their brain. Now, we may not need to know all the ins and outs, the details, but it's not too much of a stretch for a really good prescriber who understands ADHD to explain to you that the medications help to change certain neurotransmitters in your brain that tend to be in lower supply and to increase them to help the ADHD symptoms. That's a fairly quick, simple explanation. If they can't explain it to you or they tell you that you really don't need to know that, that's a problem. You have a right to know how the medications work, and whether or not you want to or not, you advocating for yourself and expecting that is your right to have that. You want to be able to know what the negative side effects are of normal with this ADHD medication. You probably know what they are anyway, but you want to know that your prescriber knows what they are. And you also want to have a conversation about which of those side effects and at what point would you want me to interact with you. So another question is, how will I know if this medication is working? That's a huge question, right? Most people with ADHD don't know that. You want to know that your prescriber knows that question or the answer to that question or can tell you what to be expecting beyond watch out for your sleep or watch out for your appetite, all right? You want to know how you take the medication. It is not self-explanatory how to take these medications. Do you take it once a day? Do you take it twice a day? Do you take it with food? Do you not take it with food? Those types of things. You want to know before you even leave the office, under what conditions does this prescriber want you to contact them or to stop taking the medication? This is a question to ask up front. So if it happens, and it just probably will, you know what the answer is. And finally, what you want to know is what is the plan and when is the follow-up appointment with you? You want to know what kind of follow-up and overview and that this particular prescriber is going to provide for you. These are questions that can help you either feel more confident with the prescriber that you have or help you realize that, okay, this is not the person I want to be working with to help me manage my ADHD. Let's move on to another sort of bugaboo that happens with ADHD medications, and that is this fact that, at least in the United States, ADHD medications are what is called a Scheduled II substance. And what does that mean? Because it really does cause a lot of sort of obstacles for us to navigate through when we're trying to get these medications. So the Federal Drug Administration, like I mentioned, in the United States, this is different around the world, oversees the substances in the U.S., and they've done that since the beginning of about the 20th century. And in 1970, the FDA created different drug classifications under what they call the Controlled Substance Act. And the drug classifications organize drugs or medications into groups based on a risk of abuse. And there are 5 levels of those, and substances are placed in their respective level or schedule based on whether they have a medical value in treatment in the United States and their relative abuse potential. All right. If a specific medicine can be abused, then it's categorized in one of those 5 levels. And the levels are really based on the potential for abuse and the perceived medical value of that particular medication or substance. And ADHD medications that are categorized in this scheduling system as a Schedule II substances include the amphetamines like dexedrine, Adderall, Vyvanse, the methamphetamines like Disoxin, and methylphenidate, Ritalin, and Concerta. So the majority, all of the stimulant medications fall in that category. All right. And the reason they're in there is not because of the potential for abuse. Right. We know that some people can potentially abuse these medications. Typically, it's not people with ADHD, but they can be abused by someone. So that's why they're in that particular kind of category. What this means is that there's a lot of restrictions on how these medications can be, or the availability, let me put it this way, of these medications. And that what that translates to in real time is that these medications, technically, you cannot just get a refill on these medications. You actually need a prescription each time to get a new or to refill that prescription. And that creates a lot of chaos, a lot of deadlines, a lot of having to calculate days and time on calendars in order to keep track of it. But it's because it is a restricted and a controlled substance. So the fact that you need a new prescription, I'm sure many of you out there can tell stories about how you get your prescriptions each and every month. It also is the frequency of filling the prescription. So typically Schedule II medications can only be filled every 30 days, which sounds really great unless you have a month where there's 28 days or 31 days. Then it doesn't work as well for that. All right. Depending on the state that you live in, and there's a federal law, which is what the Federal Drug Administration covers. Each state can tweak that, let's say, a bit differently. So it's important that you are also learning about your state laws, because the laws in your state can change how your prescriber accommodates some of these rules of the Federal Drug Administration. And what that means to you might be that instead of having to go each and every time to the medical doctor or to your prescriber's office and pick up the prescription and take it yourself to the pharmacy each time the medication needs to be refilled, your doctor in some states might be able to write 3 different prescriptions so that each month you can go to the pharmacy and get that filled. It helps somewhat. It takes out at least one particular step in the process. So finding out what your state's rules are about how Schedule II medications can be prescribed, you'll need to find that out. And again, like I mentioned, this is particular to the United States, and it's going to be different in other countries and provinces. One of the other things that tends to happen or really can be problematic with the Schedule II substance, as I mentioned, you can only get them refilled so often, and they're very particular about how many of those medications are out there. So it becomes problematic. It's no problem if the dose is consistent, like I said, a little bit challenge when the days of the month change. But sometimes we might, and it also, the Schedule II rules of the states also can indicate if your pharmacy can fill them on sort of an emergency or a as-needed basis. So some states allow for pharmacists to be able to maybe give you a few days of medications if you have run out before you can get the prescription filled. One of the things that I want you to realize, and I've come to appreciate, is that the pharmacists really are putting their license on the line when they do that. But if you have a good relationship with your pharmacist, they may be more likely to do that. The other problem that happens when you have a Schedule II substance is that a lot of pharmacies don't want to keep those particular substances or a lot of them in stock. It creates a risk for them. Apparently, pharmacies are robbed a lot because of the particular scheduled substances. So they don't want to keep a lot of them in stock. Also, if a pharmacy has a lot of extra stock of particular Schedule II substances that aren't sold, it's a cost out of pocket for them. They don't get reimbursed for that money that they bought that medication for. So what people run into, and I know many of you have, is that these medications run out. You might go to the pharmacy, they've always had the medication, or you start at a new pharmacy and they have the medication. You go there the next month, you've gotten your prescription, you've gone through that routine to get it. You get into the pharmacy and they don't have enough of the medication to fill that particular prescription. And the other challenge is they're not going to even tell you, if it's within the same pharmacy chain, what other pharmacy might have the medications. And again, the reason they don't is because of the risk of being robbed and having those medications stolen. So you can spend literally the rest of the afternoon trying to find a pharmacy that has those medications. One of the ways to get around that is to consistently go to the same pharmacy and let them know that this is where you're going to get your medications filled. And therefore, they can anticipate that you're going to be back each month and will work with you as far as trying to make sure that you're able to fill your prescription each time. If you have an increase in your dose, of course, that would create a challenge, that sort of thing. So one of the things that you can do also when we're talking about Schedule II substances is to make sure that a few things are consistent with regard to the prescription. And that includes making sure that the prescription has the date that it was issued, the prescriber's name, your name and address, the medication's name, the strength. I'll show a slide that has all this on it. But that basically overall that the prescription is filled out completely, because that will give the pharmacist the information they need. As I mentioned, just sort of as a review, what you need to know about Schedule II medications. I told you quite a bit, but it does change per law. So I'm showing you a link here where you can go to check out your particular states, if you live in the United States, what the particular laws are in your state with regards to the Schedule II substances, so you can be informed and aware when you go into your doctor and or your pharmacy to get those filled. All right. Talking about pharmacists, what I have come to appreciate is the importance and the important role that pharmacists have in this ADHD medication maze. They really are required to exercise their professional judgment and make a determination about the legitimacy of the controlled substance prescription. And each and every time the professional license is on the line. And before we go really any further talking about pharmacists or pharmacies, I really want to thank Colleen Hicks. She's a pharmacist out of Ontario, Canada. And she sent me a personal email before this webinar to clarify the high sense of responsibility that pharmacists take when dispensing this ADHD medication and the extra caution they take with scheduled substances. And also admitting that a lot of pharmacists really do not get any specific education about ADHD. It's really not an easy job. And in fact, I think of the pharmacist oftentimes like sort of like the bouncers, not in a bad way, but they're the ones that they have to check the ID, they're the doorman, they look at the reasonableness of the prescription, they determine whether or not the behavior of someone trying to get their prescriptions filled is reasonable or suspicious. And basically, you have to get by them to get your prescription for ADHD medication filled. And it can be a bit intimidating. And I have heard a lot of stories, true stories, about people feeling very badly when they leave a pharmacy, almost being made to feel like they are trying to procure some sort of illegal substance rather than getting a medication to treat their medical condition. There are situations when pharmacists are going to be less than friendly and uncooperative, and it typically is when there's some suspicion involved. So I want to tell you a little bit about situations where you might inadvertently make a pharmacist suspicious, or situations in which pharmacists find suspicious so you can avoid them. So one of the things that's very key is that when a pharmacist doesn't know you, they get suspicious. Well, of course, the first time you see a pharmacist or go to a pharmacy, that might be the first time. But if it's consistently you're going to different pharmacies and they don't know you, that is something that's suspicious to them. If they don't know your prescriber or the prescriber isn't local, that's suspicious. It does limit, and I know a lot of people have to go outside their immediate area for a prescriber or even to get their medications filled. But these are just, I wanted to share with you some of the things that are red flags to pharmacists so you can at least be aware of them. And then I'll tell you some things that Colleen mentioned to me would be really helpful in working with your pharmacist to avoid some of this. They also get suspicious if the medication is not consistent with your treatment history or the diagnosis. And again, if you're newly diagnosed, obviously it would be new to your treatment history. If the prescription is too messy, if there's like use of whiteout, erasing, alterations to the quantity of medications, that's a photocopied prescription, or there's spelling errors, that would be suspicious for them. Sort of interestingly, on the other hand, it can also be suspicious if the prescription is too good. If it's too good, what it means is that it's too neat, too descriptive as to the directions for the administration, or the signature is too neat. Well, usually not a problem, I don't think, with the medical prescribers, notorious for having illegible penmanship, but apparently it needs to be messy enough, but not too messy and not too neat, somewhere in the middle, a happy medium. They also get suspicious if you're in a hurry and unable to return later. Now, I understand that oftentimes with ADHD, we're there at the last minute anyway, trying to get them filled. But just to let you know, it is something that puts them on alert if someone's sort of running in and feels like there's an urgency to get out. So if you're presenting a prescription right before the pharmacy closes, when it's difficult to be able to confirm what your diagnosis is or who your doctor is, those types of things would be concerning to them. So what can you do to get through this part of the maze relatively smoothly and unscathed? Well, here are a few things to know about filling your prescription, things that you can actually check as you are either leaving your prescriber's office with your prescription in hand. So some of the things that you're going to want to be looking for, I call it the TSA sort of prescription pre-checklist. And that means that it's totally filled out, it's signed, and it's accurate. And there's a slide here that shows you all the different pieces of information that you want to make sure is on your prescription. And I know that this is one of the hurdles that some people have. They get the prescription to the pharmacy and the pharmacist says, well, that's not written right. So this is a visual diagram for you to be able to look at and say, oh, okay, these are the pieces that I need to have in order that the pharmacy fills them. In addition to that, some of the suggestions that Colleen Hicks had, I thought were really great. And she said, make sure that your doctor, in addition to these other aspects of getting your prescription filled, that they also include the diagnosis. That's going to help create that context that the pharmacist can understand that you need that medication in. Also, because I mentioned to Colleen, sometimes I have gone into pharmacists or pharmacies and insurance companies were going to cover certain costs of medications. And I told them, I will just pay out of pocket for that. That's not a problem. And she said, sometimes that can actually be suspicious. Like, why would you be paying out of pocket for it? And she said, instead, what you want to do is just be very upfront with the pharmacist and say, you know what? I know that my insurance company is not going to pay for a portion of this. I want you to know upfront I'm going to pay for it. So really that upfront nature of being very open and wanting and creating that relationship with your pharmacist really can go a long way. One of the things that I especially liked that Colleen mentioned is actually printing out information about ADHD and taking it to your pharmacist. She very much admits that part of understanding ADHD is not part of, as it is not for a lot of medical practitioners, part of their education. And one of the ways to increase not only pharmacists' understanding of ADHD and the medications they prescribe for it is for us to educate them. So she readily encouraged me to share with you to take information in and share it with your pharmacist about ADHD and the medications. So hopefully these were a bit helpful for you with regards to knowing how to maybe have a little bit of control with regards to getting your prescriptions filled. The next thing that I want to talk about really quick is switch gears and talk about insurance and insurance companies' roles. I know this is a huge issue for many people out there. Insurance companies have become something we can't live with in a way, we can't live without. And mental health benefits, such as those for ADHD treatment, are particularly tricky because insurance companies usually have a cap on the amount of money they spend in any given year or on the amounts of visits they'll pay for. Insurances are really a lot, I guess in a metaphor, like a gatekeeper. They're sort of the givers and the takers of healthcare. And despite not having medical degrees, they seem to have the power to determine what medical treatment, including the medications, are that we get. I mean, sadly, I think a study done by our Attitude magazine found out that more than 50% of persons who responded to questions around their healthcare said that they'd been limited by insurance in taking the medication they wanted. It's a huge challenge. We know that. And it's important to know that even though what's important to know is that even though insurance companies can wield this power of veto as to what they will pay for, they may not always have the final say when it comes to being able to take the medications prescribed by your prescriber. All right. As I mentioned, one of the ways to get around this is for you to pay out of pocket. I know that's not possible for everyone, but it is one of the options. Your insurance company does not get to determine what you take medically. They can determine whether or not they want to pay for it, but they don't get to determine what you and your doctor have decided. So you can pay for that out of pocket. All right. Another key is to petition your insurance company to get them to pay for a particular medication or a particular treatment. And the key to doing this is to be informed, to be persistent, and to be patient. And I know some people have done this and not got necessarily the results they want. Statistically, it seems that if you can continue to appeal, not just once, but twice, even 3 times, statistically, the odds are in your favor. Very few people are going to be that persistent. The other key to doing this is to also get the support, obviously, of your prescriber, medical professionals, anyone that can help strengthen your position that you or your child or someone that you love needs a particular medication, needs a particular frequency of hospice visits, that sort of thing. Certainly it helps to know what the benefits are of your health insurance. Many people really don't know before we go into this what those services are, what's included in there, what the outpatient visits are, what's considered a non-serious medical or mental diagnosis, how many visits are provided. If we start the appeal process at the beginning of this, there's more likelihood that we're going to get permission to do it than after we're in this for a while. So knowing what your health insurance provides, if that's the situation for you, can help you be one step ahead of this process. Knowing your state laws, as I mentioned, because that does change what certain healthcare benefits. Some states are required to equally match mental health treatment. You need to check with your state to find that out. As I mentioned, the key is to be persistent. You do have the right to appeal if the claim is denied, and don't get discouraged. If you continue to pursue the claim, the statistics are that your claim will be granted, but it does take persistence. All right. making sure that you are keeping track of the documentation, who you talked with. I mean, you're in the middle of bureaucracy here, right? Keep the names and numbers of everyone with whom you speak, the dates which you spoke, and what happened in the conversation. And as difficult as it is, one of the pieces of advice is to be positive, polite, and patient with a customer service. Now, I admit I am not patient, polite with customer service when my family's health is at risk. But I also know that those people that I'm talking to on the phone have the power to let me talk to the next person I want to talk to. So it is good advice, and maybe knowing it beforehand, knowing that this is part of what you're going to need to bring in with you into that medication maze might help you hold your cool just long enough in order to get through to who you need to get through to. Another sort of piece of advice that seems to come up is, and not, again, an option for everybody, is to shop around for insurance and even get supplemental insurance. It's not always possible. I understand that. And which is why we're going to be talking about some of ways to cut the cost of ADHD medications next. So money-saving tips for ADHD medication. I really spent a lot of time doing research about this to find the best information I could for you. And rather than just sort of going through exactly what was on these websites, what I decided to do was break down some of the different options where you might be able to save some money on ADHD medication, and also include the websites that you can go to yourself to check those out. Basically, the cost-saving opportunities include what are called payment assistance programs, where either nonprofit organizations or even pharmacies provide some sort of discount on medications. All right. Sometimes there's a time limit on those particular kinds of discounts. There might be a number of prescriptions filled discount on those, but it's certainly worth checking out. And unfortunately, not every medication has this kind of payment assistance program, but there's a large majority of them seem to have some sort of payment assistance program available. So there are three or four different sites that I mentioned here that you definitely want to go check out. One is Needy Meds, the other is RX Assist, and then there's RX Pharmacy Coupons. So some of these payment assistance programs, as I said, come from nonprofits, some through pharmacies and some through the pharmaceutical companies themselves. One of the other piece of this, or similar to that, is what are called the drug makers discount cards. Again, check out the website goodrx.com to see about discount cards. Another option to keeping the cost of ADHD medication down is to ask your doctor for samples. That usually can't go on forever and ever, but it can help in some respect if you're able to get some sample medication from your doctor. Most pharmaceutical representatives leave samples with the prescribers. So ask your doctor to see if that's a possibility for you. Going generic is an option for some, because sometimes generic medications have a different effectiveness than the brand medications. It may not be the answer for everybody, but generic might be an option for some people, and those tend to be less expensive. The other thing is to tell your prescriber that cost does matter, and they can then adjust the medication that you have to one that is less expensive. It's really amazing the differences in cost of ADHD medication. There's actually a Consumer Reports article on drugs to treat ADHD. You can just look it up on the Consumer Reports online about drugs to treat ADHD and the different price and cost point of the different medications. It'll give you a really good idea. And you can even take this into your doctor and say, here's the different options that I have and the cost differences. Prescribers don't always know that. So sharing that with them might be one option for you. Also, I want to make sure that I don't sort of neglect to also reinforce the non-pharmacological interventions that can really help manage or help impact the management of your ADHD. Things like sleep, exercise, getting a good diet, always are going to just help in general with some of the symptoms that you have. Finally, there's also make sure you're checking out your flexible spending accounts to see if there's some funds in there that you can use for your medications and or your doctor's appointments or prescriber appointments. So really quickly, I'm just going to, we're heading towards the end here. I'm going to finish up by talking about one of the biggest things that I tend to work on with my clients, which is how to remember not to forget to take your ADHD medications. Once we get them, once we get through this medication maze, we have the pills in our hands, we're all ready to go. It is not easy for people with ADHD to remember to take their medications. It just isn't. So any kind of reminder system you can use is going to be well worth it. Pill cases are great. You can lay them out at the beginning of the week. You can see, I've taken a medication and can't remember that I just took it. So if I put all these in a pill case at the beginning of the week, it's like, it's either there or it's not. And that tells me whether or not I took it. I sometimes feel like I'm my grandmother, but it's what I need to do. Setting alarms is really helpful. Our smartphones have evolved into medication reminder systems, and there are certain apps on there that you can find too to help you remember to take your medications. Unfortunately, I don't think there's an app to help us calculate how to do those calendar algorithms, but remembering to take it, there are lots of apps for those. Make sure you're keeping an extra dose in your backpack, in your purse, in your wallet, because inevitably we're going to forget to take it, and you have the dose. You have an extra dose there. One of the ways to remember to take or to even create a habit to take your medication is to attach it to something else that you are already doing. I've had clients who tape their medication bottle to their toothbrush, to their coffee pot, to the back of their, to the back of their toilet seat, because that will help them remember to take their medication. That's a routine that they have, and attaching it to that really can help. Finally, writing it down helps. And this is a medication log that I've created. Attitude, I believe, has several different variations of it, but it's a great tool to be able for you to keep track of your medications. It helps you remember to take them. It helps you see the effectiveness of the medication, and something that you can use and take to your prescriber conversation about the doses of medication. Is it working? Is it not? And what needs to happen next?
I wanted to mention a tip that one of the listeners posted. She works for a pharmaceutical company, and she said that it can be helpful when you're submitting an appeal to include the credentials of the person who refused to give you to provide the medication. That sometimes the fact that it's not a physician can help. Okay, so please put your questions for Laurie in. I see there are many of them here, and I'm going to start by asking Laurie about generic medications. There are people who find the generics that they're prescribed difficult. What is your feeling on whether or not generics work effectively? And how do you, in your experience, how is the cost associated with generics relative to the brand medications?
So the thing with generic medications is that the FDA, again, in the United States, allows for a 30% variability in the effectiveness of the generic medications, in the effectiveness of the generic versus the brand name. So when you consider sometimes how finely we need to tune the ADHD medications to have the maximum effectiveness, it makes sense that if we are going from brand to generic or from generic to generic, that there could be a lot of difference in how we feel it works for us. So what I typically have found is that, first off, we don't recognizing that there can be a difference in how the generic medication works. It's helpful to know that, because then we can adjust the dose for that. The other thing to know is that if you notice that you're taking a generic medication and it works, is to know which generic medication, who which is the pharmaceutical company that makes that particular generic medication, so that you can let your pharmacy know that. Because basically pharmacies are going to buy, the best price on the generic market each and every time that comes up. But if you have found that one particular generic medication really makes a difference for you, and all of a sudden the next time you go to the pharmacy and you're getting a yellow pill rather than a blue pill, let the pharmacist know. And my understanding is that they will do what they can to get that particular generic back. But it will oftentimes need, if you're going from the brand to generic, it needs to be adjusted for dosage. That's very common. So let me see, looking here, let me see if I can give an example of sort of cost. Let's see. If we're looking at, hold on just a minute. Generic Adderall is anywhere from $84 to $99, 2 pills a day. Brand is $285 to $303. So a significant savings there. Same with the dextroamphetamine. Generic is $24 to $37 for 2 pills. And for the same generic, it's $86 to $115. So quite significant savings, but you'll need to make sure that you're adjusting that dosage and working with your prescriber, and knowing that you're not crazy if you think that it's different. If people keep telling you that it's not, it is.
Okay. We have a physician online who's listening in, who posted that since the Affordable Care Act went into effect, she found that pharmacists began questioning her prescription amounts. That there seemed to be a so-called FDA guideline that was being used by the pharmacist, and any prescribing in excess of that was being denied. Laurie, is this something you've experienced, or listeners, have any of you experienced this? That's sort of new to me. That sounds quite difficult.
Well, I think it's, the Affordable Care Act. I have a lot of experience with the Affordable Care Act in some positive ways and some not so positive ways. I think the Affordable Care Act, we need to understand, is just no different than any other kind of insurance, right? Where the fact is, insurance companies they're a business, and they're going to try and lower their costs as much as possible. So I think the Affordable Care Act just is, follows suit with that. I have noticed, I haven't necessarily worked with someone who's on the Affordable Care Act to get their ADHD. Well, that's not true. But I have noticed that there is a lot more concern about dosages of medication.
So that must be this FDA guideline, right?
Yeah.
So that's something else to, I guess, find out about what the FDA guideline is. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A tip here from a listener said, read generics tip that Walgreens sells the more effective generic Concerta, whereas CVS is no longer allowed to order it. So if you're having that problem of which generic you're getting, it sounds like Walgreens is the one to go. Mm-hmm. Questions about Medicaid for ADHD medication. One of the listeners has found that Medicaid won't pay for ADHD medications for adults unless they were diagnosed before age 18, which apparently I think might be an old DSM criterion. Do you know anything about this, Laurie, and about Medicaid's role or in ADHD medication payment?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. And what I would tell someone who, I guess this is one of those appeal things, is that we may be diagnosed after 18, but we have ADHD before 18, right? It's not, a brain style is not something that change. I mean, it changes, but if we are diagnosed as adults with ADHD, barring that there's some sort of organic type of cause of the ADHD, that condition's always been there. We've just been able to manage it. And short of being able to convince Medicaid that is the case, I don't really. I'm trying to think.
Yeah. It sounds like this is not a one-off. If someone else says, an insurance company won't pay for ADHD medications for adults over 18 years old. So, the suggestion that you made from the pharmacist of creating a handout, maybe this is something Attitude can do to create some sort of a handout that our listeners can take to their pharmacist about, or insurance companies about ADHD, because it sounds like there are so many misconceptions out there that we need to have materials available for people to hand their pharmacist.
Or to hand that, or to
I really had no idea that misconceptions, which we know biases out there, that it could actually affect the decision to prescribe medication. It's shocking, really shocking.
It is shocking. It's really shocking.
Yeah. So let's see. This is another person. My doctor prescribes over the FDA guidance. That's exactly, I think, the problem that I just raised. So my doctor my insurance will no longer pay for it. I guess that's the appeal situation, right? Here's a problem that's come up many times here among our listeners. And that is when they travel for business, or they go on vacation, how do they handle the fact that they can't refill their prescription because they're out of town? Is there any solution to that?
So I ask about that, right? Because what are we supposed to not go on vacation, or we travel business? So there's a couple different ways to do that. And it does require, again, a bit of what I call calendar algorithm. It may be possible for you to go to your pharmacy if you've developed, and it's one of the reasons why I really love calling Hicks' suggestion, is to develop a relationship with the pharmacy you have. If you tell them, I need to go out of town, I will be on vacation, it seems like it's a fairly common knowledge that trying to fill a prescription like a Schedule II outside of your own sort of little community it can be difficult. Let your prescriber know and see if your prescriber and your pharmacist know that that's what's going to happen, and see if you can't get an advance in the medication. The other thing to do is, if you're on vacation, and Colleen mentioned this, she said, tell the pharmacist that you're there, that you are on vacation, and you understand that can be difficult. But you're on vacation and your medication is due to be refilled, and perhaps have the number for them to call your doctor, because that's what they're going to want to do, and do it on a day that they can make that call will expedite the process. Be upfront with them and let them know what's going on. Yeah.
All right. Here's another. I love the tips that our listeners post. They're always so helpful. This person says that her doctor splits prescriptions, giving her one for the brand and one for the generic, in order so that she can take the amount that he prescribes, which is above the quote FDA guidance. So it's a as you said, Laurie, finding a prescriber who will work for you, work with you. Question. People want to know, do you have to keep your doses of ADHD medications in their original bottle? Can they be in a pill case? Are they legally at risk because if their medications are not in their correct labeled?
No. Well, if you're going to travel and you're going to, the ideal is to keep in the pill case. I do a lot of traveling, and if I had to take, they're cumbersome, they're bulky, right? So an option to do is to put them in a little Ziploc, or one of those small little Ziplocs. Mm-hmm. What you do is make sure you take one of the labels off your pill bottle and tape it to that. So you still have the prescription, just in a different container. Yeah.
All right. We're out of time, I'm afraid. I think there's so much here. And, it's so painful to hear what people go through to get medications. So, Laurie, thank you for everything that you do to try to help people manage this. So thanks, everyone, for being here with Attitude. And thank you, Laurie. As always, we really are grateful for all your advice and experience to help our listeners. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.